Off the Break today is commentator and analyst for the Call of Duty League. It is Chance. Chance, how are things in Colorado?
Exhausting. It's like the buddy of mine came up for like the past week, and this is the first time I've like properly gone hiking on like all the mountains, 13,000 feet plus, stuff like that. And I'm tired. I'm really tired. That is incredibly difficult, and I'm avoid saying curse words, but that's how I really feel.
Well, why? What was the decision behind move to Colorado? Was it just because of the what? Well, I'll say this. I feel like certain states, people are always of the mindset that are like, hey, we don't talk about this state because we don't want people to come here. Is Colorado like one of those states where it's like kind of a diamond in the rough?
No, not at all.
No?
Literally everyone in the country that's like, I think below the age of 40, everyone moves to Colorado. I'm not even kidding when I say that every person I meet is not from here. I've yet to meet someone that is truly from Colorado.
Huh.
It's just they've been flooded by like the rest of the country. It's like one of the most popular cities for literally millennials. Millennials just love coming here for whatever reason. Yeah.
That's odd because like whenever I moved to Texas, not the problem, but like, you know, the emphasis is always like, hey, move to this state because of this reason. I feel like whenever I moved to Texas, I was like, oh yeah, everyone else heard the same thing that I have about Texas as well, which is that it's very nice. I guess, you know, a few certain states can kind of, you know, go under the radar, but I got to talk to you about kind of, I guess you could say the working from home life a little bit. Obviously, like we said, you're in Colorado. What is the primary struggle a commentator has in commentating from home versus a live event?
So the actual answer is just it's tougher to like sort of not like get in the zone, but get in the right hype kind of mindset of like, if you have that London crowd behind you, they're making the energy high enough that you're just like forced to at least match it, or it's just going to be like wrong. But like we're going into like even like random normal event. Sometimes it's harder to force yourself because you're just like hanging out, like eating whatever kind of food, like watching the events like a fan would purely be doing.
Yeah.
And then you have to ramp it up to 11 at like the drop of a dime and like try to match the hype for whatever like the circumstances. So I would say matching the energy level is the most difficult part, but like, I don't want to complain about the job. It's a super easy job. I don't want to, you know, no negativity for it, but that would be the most difficult part.
Right, that's understandable. And I think with champs coming up as well, it's definitely going to feel odd, not just for obviously the players or the fans who maybe would be at the event, but for the talent as well in regards to, you know, trying to kind of bring the hype to an event that's kind of in some ways from an at-home perspective, you know, it kind of works the same way. But I'm not sure if you've heard about it in light of what we've talked about, but this event in particular, $4.6 million prize pool. It's a pretty big deal. And one team in particular that decided to make a major change ahead of the biggest event in Call of Duty esports history is the Minnesota Rokkr, who decided to bench previous star player GodRX. What did you make of Minnesota's decision here, Chance?
I immediately, oh my God, that sucks for GodRX. Like, they are dropping a player that, like, at one point was the best player on their team, one of the best players in the game, and to drop him on his head right before the big event, it's heartbreaking for him. But the one thing I really did appreciate is just the coaches taking the time to make the video, put it out on social media to explain why they did it, so we don't have to sit there and guess and just. Because if they didn't say that, the analysis for me would have been like, what the hell are they doing? Why are they making this change before the biggest event? Like, if you want to make a change, sure, fine. Like, they've been struggling online, won 2 or 3 series in the past, like 5 home series events. But even still, to make a change, it seems ridiculous. But for them to take the time and be like, look, we're having significant pacing issues. Obviously, the team has not been working out. This is why he had to be the player of just like too slow for the pace we need. Exceed is going to make up for that difference. Like, I can appreciate that because now I can go in when I commentate and being like, look, it sucks for GodRX, but the team needed to have this. Here's like the X, Y, and Z of why it happened. And now we have our storyline of like what to look at. So there's the less like chaotic answer of just being like, oh no. It's like for when Zero got dropped by New York, or even like when Chino gets dropped by Optic, it's sort of just like we're guessing at the rationale and maybe we can get close, but like you can only do so well if you're not there with the inner dynamics of the team. So I appreciate the organization for at least making it public, but obviously like that's a tough spot to be in. They now have 2.5, 3 weeks with their new roster to try to bounce back. So it's going to be an interesting tournament for them.
Now, I have to ask you, I know that you're not, and I know you kind of alluded to this already, you're not in the Rokkr camp, but would you have made the same decision? I know we talked about it a little bit in terms of like the timing. Would you have kind of gone out there and said, you know what, for the pace of the team, whatever the logistics are, but in your opinion, if you had control, would you be making that same decision?
I don't think I would have had the balls to, quite honestly, because like it would have been like partway through the year, something the analysts are saying is like they need to make a change, and I've always been in the camp of like stick it out, go together with your team, like play it long term. But obviously, if you have enough tournaments go by and you don't have any success, that really does put the pressure on. But I don't know if I would have had the balls right before the final tournament to make that commitment. I don't know if I would have been able to take out the player that at one point was your best, even though he hasn't been struggling, and replace him with a guy that, again, we haven't seen a ton in the league. So I'm not saying it's the wrong decision. I just think it's impressive that they were willing to make that call, because obviously something needed to happen. But I think I default back to the classic of just like, if he was your best at one point, you're hoping he can get that superstar form. And if you want to make a change, drop your worst player, whoever you think that may be, and replace him and hope for like the one-to-one benefit. So I think they're going about it in a much smarter way than what I would have done initially. But like, I don't know. It's just a weird circumstance, but I appreciate the attempt from the guys.
100%, right? That was kind of, for me, the instant thing that I took away from the announcement was like, even if I disagree with it, I at least respect the move, because like I said, not many people would. I think I'm kind of there with you. Like, at least from, and not even getting into the core details of the decision making behind it, but I at least respect the idea behind trying to do a move like this, because I don't think many teams probably would have done so. But I don't know. I think Analyst, as you kind of mentioned it as well, I think kind of shared the same opinion that I do, which was that like at certain points throughout the season, for the Minnesota Rokkr, I guess you could say it was like, I think it was the Dallas home series finals when they are getting ready to face off against the Florida Mutineers, which is not the same Florida Mutineers team with Awakening. Whenever they go into that grand final, for me, that was kind of, I wouldn't say the breaking point, but it was definitely what kind of started a lot of the remaining issues, because I think everybody had chosen the Minnesota Rokkr. Assault was playing fantastic. The team looked at their best, and then they go into the Florida series, they win the first map, and they get smoked the next three. That for me, and I'm not sure if you remember that moment specifically, but for me, that was kind of like, oh my gosh. I think for me, at least, that kind of showed me, I don't know if this team has the ability to win. I think mixed in with a lot of other possible problems, that may have been, at least the starter, if you will, what kind of began the fire for the issue with the Rokkr. But I'm not sure if you remember that home series at all.
I don't remember the specific event, but I remember when the online switch to happen and we started to watch the decline of the team, I would like still have faith, and I'm like, next tournament they're going to bounce back, next tournament they're going to bounce back. And it was just every single time I lost more and more faith. And it did get to the point where like, if they had stuck with this roster going into champs, in my mind, no matter, even if I'm like trying to give the salesman pitch while casting, in my mind, I'm gonna be like, they're gonna lose whatever the first series is gonna be. Like, this team has no chance. Like, it got like that bad in my mind that would be my just like gut check for the team. So yeah, it's not a one moment, but just that slow degrade for me that never really had any sort of bounce back.
Now, my personal recommendation, if you will, for the Rokkr and the decision, for me at least, was that, hey, I think it's a little bit late overall. Talked about that. My personal recommendation was to kind of ride it out with the team and to try to change their identity. Now, I know they're not a fantastic team in Search and Destroy, but my kind of personal interpretation was like, let's change the identity of the team, which, again, isn't easy ahead of champs, but kind of refacing the lineup, for me at least, was a little bit too drastic. I don't know, I feel like, at least in my eyes, the way that I could see them trying to have this kind of late year hurrah was to kind of change up their style to become kind of more of a team that relies on one respawn, focus solely on Search and Destroy. We've heard a lot of people talk about it. I think Merch's been one on the record constantly to say Search and Destroy is kind of the most consistent game mode. Critique me on that. Do you think that would have been the right move for the Rokkr to try and implement? What's kind of your thoughts on that take?
I think, like, from the outside looking in, that is perfectly reasonable. Of just being like, again, it's just, if we're not there every day, it's so difficult to make the call of like, it's a pacing issue, a consistency, because we're not there for the scrims. So we don't get as much information as like the coaches and analysts do for the team. So I think, yes, from the outside looking in, You know you have your star player that is 0.4 less than he was in Respawn. You know S&D is a game, or a game mode, I should say, that you can really hammer home. You know exactly what your route is going to be since you can look at the bracket. Like, you can go so in depth with game planning and making your strats that I'd be like, yeah, like if I'm a coach, hell yeah, we can make strategies for this team that are good enough to make sure that we're winning every S&D against whomever we play type thing. But it's just one of those things that, like, conceptually on paper, it's so much easier said than actually done. And I do actually have a lot of faith in Brian Sain and Reppin to make good decisions for the team. I think if that's what they think the issue is, I'm going to give them the credit and say that they are probably 100% spot on. Doesn't necessarily mean that they found the perfect panacea for champs, but
yeah,
I think their idea is definitely going to be more accurate than anything I could come up with from the outside perspective.
Sure, right. Obviously, it's speculation. And I guess kind of thinking more on speculation quickly before we move on, kind of thoughts for next year with this team. You think this could have future implications, future problems with GodRX being benched ahead of champs, his kind of future with the Rokkr team next season?
Dude, this is going to be the most difficult offseason in Call of Duty history. Like, the expectation would have been, like, coming into this year, since it's the full chaos, teams are not sticking together, like everybody's a free agent type deal. But now you have to make evaluations for a game where more than half the year is played online, where the game is played differently than literally any other Call of Duty we'd ever had. Like, it is going to be so complicated. And of course, I know you're speaking more of, like, to the emotional side of, like, GodRX on his team. They dropped him on his head. How professional can you be to, like, make that bounce back? And I think he can do it. Like, I haven't spoken to him, but in my mind, the Minnesota organization and the players that they picked up are professional enough that they can go into the new year and be like, look, we had that magic. We had the sauce. We just need to go back to that. It's just super unfortunate the way everything, like, panned out. So it's not like I have the answers for this because of how complicated it is, but I could see all possibilities. I could see him filling back on the team next year and then just returning to, like, quote, normal type thing. And I could see him just being like, yeah, I don't want to play for this team. The players lost faith. The coaching staff lost faith. Like, it is what it is. But maybe he agrees, for all I know. Like, obviously he's going to hate it, but maybe the pacing was the issue. You go into a new game. Now it's, like, perfect. Like, it's just, there's too many unknown factors, I think, to be able to make any sort of, like, concrete decision until the team actually starts playing the new game. So if I were them, obviously keep the full roster, wait until the year kicks off, see how the team sort of melds together, and then go from there. But it's just so many unknown factors. Like, we don't even know if we're playing online or on LAN next year. So, like, who knows, man? Who knows?
Right. I'm kind of, now that you mentioned it too, it is going to be very interesting, like you mentioned, to kind of see how the offseason kind of kicks off, the way that that things begin to kind of mend together. And I think, at least from, like, an initial point of view, again, which like you said, a lot of unknown factors, a lot of things that we don't know, and from literally, I guess you could say, kind of a very early on prediction, I don't know. I feel like there is a chance that it still could work between the two. Again, kind of given the professionalism, given the temperament of someone like GodRX. But again, it's really early to call, and it's probably not. Everything's probably going to change within a few months from now. But nonetheless, one thing that I do want to kind of hop into is this conversation around champs and the excitement around an event like this, and kind of on topic with the Minnesota Rokkr, a team that we probably didn't predict to be a dark horse, especially kind of in the first few months. Probably now could be labeled as one. I'll ask you this, though. Do you think it's easier for a dark horse team to make it far in this format in comparison to prior years? And I say format in terms of the online atmosphere, the game works, things of that nature as well.
The specific question was, you say dark horse make it farther?
Do you think it's easier this year for a dark horse team to make it farther than, say, years prior?
I think it really depends on the team. I think if you're, like, one of the teams in the bottom four that has to start in losers round one, this year is much more difficult than years past to, like, make that sort of run. But if you're a dark horse team that's starting, like, the winners round one category, you have to win what? 1, 2, 3, 4, like 5 series, and you're in the grand finals, potentially going to win the entire thing. So I think just statistically, it is easier to win the 5 series rather than make it out of the pool. Now you're going to have to, like, start the grind of the actual winners bracket. So I think it just depends on the dark horse. Anyone in loser's bracket, it is much more difficult. You have to go on a massive tear. Literally can't lose. And for those teams, in my mind, it's just not going to happen. That would be beyond a miracle run Cinderella story. I just don't think it's possible. That's how difficult it is to start that far down. But if your winners round one, you're one of the teams that like crack the top 8. Like, yeah, absolutely. This is a format made for you. Especially because in my mind, the most interesting part by far is the split that we have, right? Like as long as you make it to whatever the top 4 I think it's going to be, you now have that extra week to game plan specifically for those 3 teams. You can take all the time in the world to make sure you get the prep work in. So I think all these teams that like the difference between the super talented and the super well prepared. Now this is the one format where the super well prepared can have more of an advantage because it's not you're going over in the hotel room looking over VODs from weeks ago and taking like an hour or 2 to figure everything out. Now you get all the time in the world you possibly want. So it's not where talent necessarily will reign king. You do have an opportunity to make sure the prep work plays a bigger role.
Yeah, I agree. I think at least, and again, not talking on losers bracket teams, because I think we can all kind of agree for them. It's definitely, obviously we talk about the regular season, how that's kind of played into it. It's not by any means as if they're getting treated unfairly, but when we talk about the difference between, the easiness of a dark horse team to make it far, it's like you have to kind of keep in mind, they're kind of getting rid of the brackets, or not the bracket stage, but the group play stage. You're not having to worry about a bunch of different teams trying to get the first seed, things of that nature. You may have to face off against good teams early, but I kind of feel like that's counteracted by, again, like you mentioned, the ability to kind of be more heavily practiced for certain matchups, the ability that now this year in comparison to years previous, you have a dedicated coaching staff, analysts, things in terms of preparation. I think it will be easier, but I think, again, like you mentioned, it kind of does depend on the team, where you sit when we talk about the bracket. And I have to ask you, too, a dark horse team. Give me one that you think has the ability to possibly make it the farthest at Champs this year.
So, I mean, already I think I've at least sort of so dark horse in my mind can't be one of the top 4 because those are the guys that are all right, they have a good chance of winning.
Right.
I've already said that the guys starting in losers are not going to be able to maybe make a small run, but not going to make it all the way not to win. So literally I'm just picking from the 5 through 8 spot between New York, Minnesota, London, and Toronto. I don't think Minnesota has it just because I've been down on them, and is as interesting as the decision is, I can't have enough confidence in that to say that they're going to start smashing teams, right? That would just be ridiculous. So I think you're looking at between New York, London, and Toronto. All of them are good options, especially since 2 of those teams have already won a tournament. And I think I'd probably be highest on the subliners. I think that would probably be my pick if I had to give one of it's one of those 3 teams. It would be my number 1 spot of they have shown the looks of freaking nature skill. You have guys like Attach who we don't I'm saying as CDL commentators, don't really talk about too much or don't acknowledge how good he's been, but he's been frying pretty much all year long. Yeah, it's a well-oiled team. They're very structured as well. They have a great coaching staff behind them, which of course many of these teams do, but I just think they are capable of the highest peak, I guess, of all those teams.
I'm with you, actually. I kind of went out there and said the subliners are kind of my dark horse choice as well, for all the reasons that you mentioned, as well as kind of their run as well, because they will be facing off against a Rokkr team that by no means is kind of in their, I don't want to say their best form because we've yet to see them, but it will be their very first official series together as a team. And then you also have the Huntsmen, which would be sitting in that second round of the subliners win that. And kind of historically, they have a 2-2 record versus each other. The subliners, most recently kind of 3-0'd them at their own home series. But I also am a little bit kind of humbled in my choosing of that because of the way that we saw the subliners look, especially versus the Legion at the London home series, in which they get 3-0. That's kind of my biggest worry, but I think more positives kind of outweigh the negatives. But I don't know about your thoughts on that one. Did you kind of take a lot from the 3-0 loss that New York had? Or what did you kind of make of that instance for the team now looking forward?
I drew more conclusions, I think, about the league as a whole for that series rather than New York specifically, of just being that is genuinely how tight the competition actually is between all 12 of these teams, rather than New York falling flat against a Paris that's bad, because Paris is not a bad team, obviously very capable, but I would say less than that series. It is New York has been constantly going against the best comp. They've played Florida repeatedly, Chicago a few times, even Atlanta they've gone toe to toe with. And it's like a bunch of game fives, couple round 11s in the mix, and like plenty of them aren't going their way. But it's one of those, if like they can clean those up, make sure the respawn is just like a little bit better, like they would be my best pick. That being said, I'm not saying it's like super likely. I think the teams in the top four, definitely the top four that are way more likely to win the entire thing. Like I think Atlanta and Dallas are something fierce. Florida something fierce. Chicago is like a bit more unknown since they're making like some role swaps, but obviously that is a terrifying team to go against. So New York is a team that, like, if I was coaching against them type deal, I wouldn't be terrified of them, but obviously I would know that, like, they're going to come ready to play and you are going to have to beat them. But, like, if I'm going against an Atlanta, Dallas, Florida, whoever it's going to be, like, those are the teams I'm terrified of.
Sure. Now, how much weight, and in terms of dark horse, kind of that conversation, Toronto kind of being one of those teams, you know, how much weight do you put into the Ultras Game 5 Round 11 victory over FaZe and victory at the Toronto home series? How much weight do you put into a series victory like that?
I would say a fair bit, but not a massive amount. Like, obviously beating FaZe gives you the, like, in my mind, they have absolutely proven they're capable of winning the entire thing. Like, they have obviously left no doubt about that, but the way I see it is they had to have enough things go their way that I think the point of the tournament that they're starting at, it's just not likely for that to like consistently happen. Like they can do it, but that would be more of like the Cinderella story run where they have to go past the London, which is not an easy matchup at all. Yes, they can do it, but then like it's so crazy that these teams have to go like against London, then Florida, then Dallas. Like that's their lineup, and then they play what, like either Atlanta or Chicago on the other side of the next round. Like that run is so ridiculously difficult. And then if I'm looking on the flip side of like from the top four teams, I'm like, that just looks so much easier. You get that extra round or like 2-round bye. Like, yes, the teams you're going against are still that good, but it's like that extra round cushion that you have. It seems like it's quite a bit easier to me.
Now, when you're kind of watching, going back to it, when you're watching a round 11 like that between Ultra and FaZe, really just a very intense series, can you watch it as a fan, or is it always in the mindset of a commentator or analyst?
Well, that's a good question, actually. Can you explain what you mean a little bit more?
What is it? Sorry.
What would the difference be between watching as a fan and watching as a commentator? Like, if you're not actually commentating, what's the
I feel
difference?
like for me, sometimes I can step into the role or the mindset too much of a commentator analyst to the point where I'm not super conscious of like maybe what that win meant, rather the strategy that went behind it. So like, for example, when I referenced the Game 5 round 11, very exciting moment. It was massive for the Ultra. And my mind, though, at that moment, I didn't enjoy it as a fan. Instead, I was kind of looking at it thinking like, wait, how did this happen? How did this exactly go? Instead of kind of enjoying it, which I think there is a positive bond between the two, but I kind of find myself kind of analyzing it too much rather than enjoying it in the moment. Because again, I think that was an insane situation, you know, great moment for Methods. I got a chance to interview him, and it was awesome to kind of hear his perspective. And I feel like in the moment I didn't enjoy it enough. Does that kind of give a little bit more perspective on?
Yeah. So I would say that from watching as like a fan perspective versus like commentating, it's 50-50 on what it's going to like make it more exciting. Because there are times as a commentator where like I've been setting up this storyline or we've been hammering this point home and that like comes to fruition. And that's the exciting part when like the stars align. Yeah. But then specifically for like the Zinni 1v2 against FaZe in the round 11, that is so much more enjoyable to watch as a fan. Because like as a commentator, yes, you're setting up the piece about Methods just a little bit, but it's definitely more about Toronto as a team winning the event. So the part that's more fun for me as a fan, I was like, Methods did it. He got past the 1v1 or 1v2. Like he got that clutch back. Like that is like such a rewarding moment as a player. And that's like the exciting thing of him clutching as a fan. But if you're commentating, you acknowledge that, but then it's like now Toronto, like going into champs, they have the win. So I guess it's situational. Sometimes it's so much better to watch as a fan because you can just kick back and enjoy whatever. But sometimes the moments are sweeter as a commentator just because like the stars align, everything comes together, the storylines like hit their mark type deal.
I want to ask you quickly before we let you go about the Call of Duty League MVP voting. What we've got: Sky, Celium, Simp, Shotzi, and Envoy. I won't ask you specifically who you think the MVP is, but I will ask you what kind of goes into the decision making for you in terms of choosing an MVP.
It's so tough to like differentiate between like who provides more value, the main AR that's dropping a 1.4 type deal, or the entry sub that's dropping like a 1.05 or even a 0.9, but is getting all the first bloods. And I think the biggest part of like, once you figure out who you know all of the best 5-10 players are, then for me, it's like going over stats, going over all the big moments that they had, which of these guys are clutching their 1v1s in the search and destroys. And you just try to figure out a way of like who brings that like something like extra to the table. And I guess what like two of the guys we have, like what's the difference between like a Simp and a Skies? Like they do completely different things.
Yeah.
And it's tough to evaluate. And you really just have to take the time and go through the nitty gritty of just being like, all right, look, you know, if you were to place one of these players, maybe how much worse does the team get? Are they doing all this extra stuff on the map? If they're performing poorly, does that mean their team just doesn't have any success? And now you can see exactly how valuable it is. You try to look at everything from the entire year to build your story together. Like we can get a little bit more specific, something interesting for the Sky sell pitch for MVP. If you go and look at his specifically Game 5 stats, he averages I think he's number one on the leaderboard. He's got like 8.8 average kills or something absurd, specifically in Game 5s. So like he is the guy in Game 5 that is one of the best players in the league. He's also getting a fair number of first bloods. He's getting a fair number of diffuses as well. And it's one of those things where you find out these weird like kinks of a specific player of like when are the big moments that they shine. And of course, all the 5 guys that are on the list absolutely have those. And you just try to figure out like what weighs more, what's more impactful on the team. But it's complicated. I'm not saying it's easy, especially not in this game at all.
Right. First name that pops in your head when I mention a 6th player that didn't necessarily make the MVP voting, the first player that pops in your head when you think that guy would have definitely been the 6th person in the voting.
Abizi is my first thought without question. I have been fully aboard the Abizi train for like quite some time, like maybe through the halfway point of the year. I think his just level of production is nuts. Like, dude, just the first bloods that he gets in Search and Destroy. Like, we know how valuable a first blood is going to be. Or if you get it, you win the round 80% of the time or like something insane. In all year, he is so consistent with it. His S&D has been like lights out. And I think he is like almost a perfect example of a guy that provides so much value to a team, even though his teammate stats are always going to be better than him. So that's the first one. I think Hook is also a great option as well. I think Hook has not been talked about nearly as much as he probably should have, just because Shotzi's obviously getting a ton of the spotlight on him for great reason as well. But I would say Abizi would be my first like 6-man sort of choice. Hook right behind him, but I don't know. I'm sure there's another 3 or 4 guys you could throw on that list, and I wouldn't be mad at you.
Can you give us a sneak peek of your photography plans to take down Miles in the Grubhub food selections?
So I guess I have a picture with deer. I'm like, I was driving around with a friend, and like we just had like food in the back because we were going to like eat it or wherever, and we just passed by deer on the side of the road. And so there's at least one picture that I'm gonna have of me just like holding like a sandwich right next to a deer that's just like hanging out behind me.
Oh, so, I look forward to seeing
like that. Is something like that. No pizza though. Not yet.
Okay. I was getting ready to ask. Is there any pizza pictures? But I'm glad to hear that. Maybe the creativity is leveling up when we talk about Champs. But that is Chance, commentator and analyst for the Call of Duty League. Chance, thanks so much for taking the time, and we'll talk soon, buddy.
Thanks for having me, Landon. I'm glad you're with us now.
I appreciate it, Fal. Thank you.